Okay, so this is part of the series videos on the topic of Heroku architecture, credential by example. The link to all of the videos are available through a Medium article by the same title, right? So you can go to medium.com, look for this, and you'll find it. So this, in part one, which we just finished, last video I did, was talking about building a Node application locally, just something for us to start from. So this continues from that with getting started with Heroku in particular. So we're going to take that same application and make it run on Heroku. So the agenda here is, we're going to quickly go through here and then we'll go through it in detail. One, get an Heroku account. There's an article that's called Getting Started on Heroku with Node. We'll take a peek at that. We'll talk about the Heroku client level, CLI, client tool. Then we'll talk about changes we might need to make for Package Json. There's a port environment variable that's going to be important. There's a file called Proc File, and then I'm going to go through an activity of deploying this application. And this example is going to be downloadable. You find the article, there's going to be a link there to the final solution that we have that we're doing in this video. So, first things first, Heroku account. You just go to Heroku.com. I'm already logged in already, but you can create an account. There's no cost. They have a certain amount of free levels of access that we're going to use to do this demo, and then it can scale up to your company if you so inclined. So you get an account. There's an article called Getting Started with Heroku, so I'm going to glance at that with Node. And the first thing you'll see as part of the setup is, assuming you already have Git, which we did already from the previous video, you need to also install a software called Heroku. It's a client tool to let you interact with Heroku, right? So that's the first step. So you can go to this article, figure out how to download it yourself, right? The next step here is, now in their article, they actually have you clone their app, and we're not going to do that. We're going to actually take our current app that we wrote in a previous video and convert it to be compatible with Heroku, so we can see all the changes. So for the most part, it's going to follow along with most of the steps here. I'm just going to leave this and we're going to just do it ourselves. Okay, so I'm going to close this up. Okay, and I'm going to close this up. Okay, so what we're going to do first is get into the repository in our machine. So make it bigger. Roku cert. Okay, so this is the where we kind of left off from last time. We can run it locally. We have already installed Node modules, but now we need to do, we need to make this run on Heroku. So first thing is, I already got Heroku command line installed, which Heroku. So I already have it installed, right? So you need to have this installed before we start. And the first thing we need to do with Heroku client is you need to log in because it doesn't know who we are. So you just type in Heroku login, and it's going to prompt you to open up the browser. You log in, and I'm logged as me, and I'm logged in as my account, right? So that's me. Okay, so now I'm logged in. Okay, the next step is we need to turn this, right now it's just a repository on my machine. What we need to do is we need to create an app. So an app is sort of a unit of sort of one of the smaller units of functionality within Heroku. It's basically kind of the code and everything around it that's needed to run that code, essentially. And we'll talk more about apps and all their component parts, but think of it as an app is basically your web application, and we're going to create one. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a Heroku create. If you just do create without anything, it's going to generate some really random name for you. So I'm going to call it Heroku create. I'm going to call it Heroku. I already have a Heroku search already apparently used, so it's a globally unique name. So I'm going to put in my sort of identifier here afterwards, because I doubt anyone's created one with that name. So Heroku create that, boom, and Okay, so it did something. Matter of fact, if you go into Heroku, you will notice now I have a new app here. So I just essentially created an app, right? The next step, though, is this question is, well, what does it do under the hood? So one of the things it does, it works with Git. And if you do git remote -v, it shows all of your remotes. And you will notice here that it actually and we had earlier had added our origin, which is GitHub, but it added a new remote called Heroku. And we're going to use Git to basically deploy our code to Heroku. So it works through Git. Okay. So we created the app. This repository now is tied to that app, right? The next thing, we need to make some changes before we continue, though, before we try to run this app on Heroku. The first one is the package JSON. There's one change we need to do there. So I'm going to open up the code. And I'm going to be surprised if I get this on the first shot, but okay. So in here, a couple things that are already in place that are important. One is it's important to have a start script with Node, and that's basically the entry point for what Heroku will think will run. So start npm run serve, which is really just running this other line, which is dist server, right? So it's important that we have a start command in here. And another thing that's important, because we're using TypeScript, there's a build phase, right? When this code gets deployed somewhere, the first thing that has to happen before we try to run the script, we need to actually compile the TypeScript back to JavaScript. So coincidentally, we have a build step, right, which actually does the compiling of TypeScript to JavaScript. And it's important that it's called build here, because Heroku looks for both build and start in your package JSON for Node applications as sort of the entry point for the build step and the start step. So it's just coincidental or maybe intentional that I name these scripts as I did. Okay? So I didn't change anything, just observing things. Another thing, though, that we want to make sure, so right now I'm just for reference, right? Node, I'm running a particular version of Node, 10.16.3. And I would like to know that my Heroku instance is running that same exact version. And so that way I don't have to fight bugs, because the version I'm developing with is different than the version that's running in production or on the server. So there's an extra tag here we called engines. And you say node, and then you give a version number, 10.16.3 is what I think I said. So that what this bit in your package JSON, well, when your code gets deployed, it's going to say, oh, the code that needs to be run is this version of Node, right, and not some other version of Node. So that's an important piece. Okay, that's it for the package JSON. So all we did was we just added engines. Okay, the next thing is the question is, if you look at the source code. Yeah. So right now, when I run this code, it's going to run on port 3000 right here. It's hard coded in. The problem is Heroku will actually pass an environment variable to your running instance with the port you need to run on, and then your code needs to run on that port, and then Heroku does the mapping to port 80 from public, right? Or port 440, I think it's 443 for SSL. But the point is that you need to be able to run your code on not port 3000, but on a particular port. So I'm going to say const port equals, and the way with Node is you go process env dot port. And then I'm going to say or 3000. So what this is going to do is say, if process environment port exists, use it as the port value. Otherwise, use port 3000, which is currently what it's doing. Then I got to just replace this with port. And then I think I've actually got a line here, so I should fix this too. It's not on port 3000. Okay, and here it is $port. Okay, so now I've got the code, so it's now running on port. So set the port, I use the port, and I log out the port. Okay, so it looks all good. Okay, so that's the next change we need to make. There's one more change we need to make before we push this code to Heroku. Well, I did mention that Package Json, right, uses what's in start to figure out what to run. We're going to want to be a little bit more explicit. And what we do is we create a file called Proc File. Yeah, Proc File. And it's a Heroku configuration file. In fact, my editor even puts a little Heroku thing here. And basically the format is, in this case, we're just going to say web, because we're going to run a web service which will accept HTTP traffic, right? And then I have to run the command that's going to run. So this is node, I believe it's dist server.js. So the way this reads is I'm going to run a process called web. By using the web, it's a reserved word, which basically means this process is going to be has a web API. It basically takes web traffic on the port, whatever the environment variable port is, right? And this is the command it's going to run. It's going to run node dist server.js. And we'll learn later, you can actually have more than one process, so we can add more lines to here to run different processes. There can only be one web process, but you can have other like worker processes. There's other kinds of processes that run here. So for now, we're just going to have one line in here. Okay, so I think that is all we need to do to change the repo. So what did we do again? We first went in and changed I'm remembering now. Oh, the package JSON. We just added the engine to lock down the version of Node, right? Then we went into the source code. We added port to allow the app to run on a port supplied by Heroku by the environment variable. And when we run locally, it's just going to run on 3000, right? And then, let's see what else we did. Port. Oh, the last thing was the proc file. I'm a little distracted here. Proc file, this is basically declaring what kind of processes we're running and then what to do for that process. In this case, there's one process. Okay, now if I got this right, I'm going to close this up. First thing I need to do is it's important you commit, because when you push, you're pushing the head of the branch that you're on to Heroku. Right now, I have stuff kind of floating out there. So if I try to push something to Heroku right now, it's not going to push my changes, right? I need to actually commit my changes. So I'm going to get add minus all, git commit minus m. I'm going to call this started, right? And okay, so git status. Okay, so I have a clean, right? Now, in your case, you might be working off I'm working off my started branch, by the way. You're probably running off of your master branch, which is fine. But I need to keep different versions because I'm doing a series of videos, and I didn't want them to overwrite each other. So in your case, you're probably on the master branch. But the next step is to push this. So what you do is you go git push Heroku. Now in your case, you can probably just type in master, because you're on your master branch, you're going to push master, right? But in my case, I actually want to push, because I'm running on a different branch, I have to say this format. I'm going to push my started branch to the master branch of Heroku, right? And if I did this right, it should be, it's doing my pre-checks here. And then what you'll start to see here is a build process. All this remotes you're seeing here, this is basically kind of console logging a build process that's happening on Heroku right now. In fact, if you go to your Heroku screen and if you click on your app, it will probably say something like it's building. See right here? Build in progress. So something's happening with this app. So we're going to wait a minute. Let's watch the screen. It's probably downloading dependencies. It's going to do the build. Okay, so it says it's done. You can see here it's done, right? One thing you'll start to see here. Okay, so I just refreshed the screen. So one of the things you'll see here is there's an app here, and you can see, I'm going to click on resources. You can see right now it's got one thing called web, and it has the command. So this is basically called a dyno. It's basically your process. This is your little web server running, and if you had more than one thing in your proc file, you would have more than one dyno listed here. Okay. Let's see if we were lucky to, if I didn't make any mistakes. So if I do from here, I can do Heroku open, and it should, hey, there's hello world. So let me zoom that in. So you can see I'm running on Heroku cert Lorcan Tucker LLC, and then I've got HerokuApp.com, and you can see it's actually running my code. Right. And that's it. So we've deployed our app. I think for now, there's other things to look at here later, but you can see, for example, one important thing here to look at is if you look carefully at this, you see this number here. It says deployed with this. If I do, this is a little bit about, right? This is all about Git. If I do git log and I look at the first commit that's here, see the beginning part of this right here, 2.4. This is basically a shorthand version referring to this full commit. So when you deploy to Heroku, you're deploying using Git. You're basically deploying Git commits. In this case, it's this commit right here that is being currently running, and you can see it. That's numbers matching here. Okay, that's it for this video. And again, this is just the basics of just getting an app running on Heroku.